Hey, welcome back to the show, everybody, or welcome to the show. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for checking in. Thanks for hitting that little arrow cloud thing that downloads the podcast if you're on Apple Podcasts or wherever you are, wherever you've selected this particular episode, or if you've decided, hey, let me give this a listen. Thanks for stopping by, neighbor. Get a little Mr. Rogers in here. Thanks for coming by, everybody. Hope you're all doing well out there. And if you've stumbled upon this episode, or if you decided, hey, let me give that Epigenetic guy a listen, please listen away. And if you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. They help a lot. And I think a lot of people have been leaving some really great reviews. I mean, I know a lot of people have been leaving great reviews because I've seen them come in. So I don't know why I said I think. Maybe probably because I'm an idiot sometimes. But thank you to everybody that does that. It means a lot to me. And because of that, Epigenetic has shot up in the rankings on Apple Podcasts. So I just checked the philosophy category. Which the show is in. I think my show is labeled in society and culture, philosophy, and then, I don't know, bullshit is the third category. But I checked, it's like number 31. So that's pretty good. I'll take it. I like that. That's good. So thanks to everybody. We got a great episode today with David Krantz. David Krantz is a really awesome human being. Talked with David about a lot of different things, but David is a certified epigenetic coach, an expert in nutritional genomics, and we talk about cannabis and the cannabinoid system. We talk about genetics and environment, nature, nurture, these sorts of things, what plays into that. We've been talking about that kind of a lot. I mean, really, when you break it down, pretty much almost everything has to do with that. David's a really fascinating guy. He's an artist. He's a musician. He was recently nominated as a 2019 Top 100 Healthcare Innovator by the International Forum for Advancements in Healthcare. He has developed proprietary genetic tests for endocannabinoid for the endocannabinoid system. I almost said for endocannabinoid systems, but I think it's just with humans. I don't know if he's developed anything for like beavers or elk, but he developed proprietary genetic tests for the endocannabinoid system and has spoken at conferences like Biohacking Con, and he's been on a lot of different podcasts. People who've been on this show, my friends over at Psychedelics Today, Third Eye Drops, other places. And he's currently an advisor to AMMA Healing as a specialist on the genetics of the endocannabinoid system. He's also currently serving as the director of applied psychoacoustics at the Epigenetic Center. I hope I got that right. I apologize if I didn't. But yeah, we talk. He's as a musician. He does a lot of interesting work with sound, and just overall, really fascinating person. David Krantz has something to tell you for sure. We get into this conversation about optimal health, epigenetics, biohacking, the cannabinoid system, cannabis, music, art, and more. Let's get in this conversation with David Krantz. Before we do, if you like the show, please share it, subscribe, tell people about it, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you really want to go a step further, go to patreon.com/MikeBrank, and you can donate $1, $2, $3, $4, $1 million, whatever you want. I'm going to start doing more stuff with that. We got the Epigenetic Inner Sanctum WhatsApp chat group available to all patrons, stickers, t-shirts, all kinds of fun things. So thank you so much to everybody for listening and being a part of this. Let's get in this conversation with David Krantz.
Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information cross-testing. They open you up to the possibility that everything we know is wrong.
We don't need new laws that control our consciousness and rigidly place it in a prison.
Cognitive
of liberty. The fact that as adults, if we're not hurting anybody else, we should have the right to explore the contours of our own consciousness without any mediation or legislation on the part of somebody else.
Reject authority. Authority is a lie.
Or is it perception?
Information is power, but we have to seize the opportunity. The opportunity.
So, welcome to Micadelic. I'm Mike, and you're the delic part, I guess.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always nice to be the delic part of something.
Yeah, you're the
manifesting part.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah. Nice. Well, that's a good jump off point. So, yeah, I think you sent me an email, and I took like a brief look into what you're doing, but it looks so vast that looks like you're in so many different kinds of areas too. I think you mentioned on your website you were a musician, and then you kind of got into working with trying to figure out how to kind of get a better handle on like what the kind of fast pace and things like that. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I had some health issues that I kind of had to figure out on my own, and that launched me into the biohacking and optimal health kind of world, and kind of shifted a lot of my focus into that field. But yeah, that's pretty much accurate there.
Yeah, so I guess we could start there. Like, walk me through that. So you're touring as a musician, and then you encountered some health problems. What was that like? Yeah,
so I started having just kind of just random episodes of passing out, which was really scary. You know, like there wasn't anything that was triggering it, and I went and saw a cardiologist. Basically, nothing really seriously wrong with my heart, but I kind of later figured out that it was because of a lot of stress. And I was just having nervous system dysfunction, and I wasn't thinking about taking care of my body at all. You know, I've always typically been someone who's more in my head than in my body.
Mm-hmm. I can relate to that. Yeah,
right. And just kind of had that more mental focus, and really hadn't taken into account the way that my body was affecting my mind, and vice versa. And it took me a while to kind of get that under control. And, there were some other factors involved. Like, I was in a really stressful creative partnership that, in retrospect, I should have seen some red flag warning signs that I just didn't. I didn't have that experience at the time. And between that and like staying up super late to, play gigs, getting home at like 3 a.m. and traveling and all that, I was just putting my body through like some pretty difficult stress. And, as I saw the results from it, and I ended up getting really into all of the health information that was out there, and just to kind of fix my body and get myself back into a place where I could like function normally. Mm-hmm. And so I started like any responsible citizen would do, and listen to a ton of podcasts. And
oh, nice.
Yeah. So, and I was working at a synthesizer factory here in town, Moog, and I was listening to all these podcasts, and I realized one day that the logo of my favorite podcast that I had kind of just discovered was actually on the building next door, and realized that there was this doctor who had this podcast. It was amazing. It was all about individualized precision medicine and genetics. He had an office next door.
Which one?
It was called Biohacking for Optimal Health. He switched the name of it. He's not doing it anymore. He's more focused on some other ventures. But you can go back and listen to all the backlog episodes of it. It's great. I booked an appointment with him. I wanted to do some blood work. And it turned out that they were actually looking for someone to develop some audio programs for them. They had built this kind of experimental sound chamber device in this building. His wife was an audiologist and peak performance specialist for the Air Force. And so I was like, Yeah, that's I will do everything in my power to come help you with this. So I quit my other job, started working with them. And shortly after that, this doctor started a training program for genetics and epigenetics and kind of personalized nutrition. And he kind of tagged me as someone that he wanted to go through the program. And I was kind of skeptical, thinking like, oh, what? I just barely got myself back to functioning normally. Like, I'm going to help other people now. And sure enough, I listened to him and went through the training program. I kind of beta tested it for him. So I went through it like 3 times before we made it public. And that's kind of where I got to where I am now, doing epigenetic coaching work with people and helping people understand how their bodies are wired, and kind of taking people through similar paths to better health that I went through myself. So kind of, a lot of synchronicities there, but that's how I got here.
Yeah. And that's, traditionally sort of how a shaman comes into being. It's they go through this kind of difficult, challenging ordeal. Usually they're sick or ill or going through maybe some kind of psychological transition, and then work their way out of that and then offer something back to the people. So, in a sense, I guess you're sort of a modern Western version of that to a certain degree. You mentioned the epigenetics, and I'm wondering if we can get into that a little bit, because I kind of familiar in what that means, but for my audience, maybe to my understanding, it's the study of basically genes that are passed down through maybe your ancestry. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's one portion of it. Just to kind of back up and give you the bird's eye view of it, it's really the study of how genes change their expression. And so that can be something that's inherited from, your parents or grandparents, but it can also be something that actually changes throughout your lifetime, and even down to the scale of a day. Like a lot of what we think about, like, you going to sleep at night and being able to produce certain hormones that you just want to secrete at night, like melatonin, that help you go to sleep. Mm-hmm. Those are controlled by an epigenetic process. And what it would, like, the actual word means control above genes. So, we have about 99.9% of the exact same DNA, you and I. That's that 1% that, or 0.1% that makes us, different to some degree. Why you have a certain hair color, why I have a certain eye color, etc. But these things also impact all these little tiny neurochemical, biological processes that go on in our body, all the metabolism and everything like that. But if you think about the reason why you're able to, say you're living in a super cold environment and then you go on vacation to somewhere that is tropical, like, your body can adapt to it. It's not just going to like shrivel up and die because, you're in a different environment. Humans are really adaptable. And so these epigenetic changes happen in response to all these different things. And these basically, on a technical level are, kind of these little tags, these little chemical tags that get kind of put onto genes and tell the RNA when you're transcribing a protein. Everything in your body is made out of protein. So your DNA kind of holds that code, but you can change the type of proteins that are being made. It's like if you had a recipe and then you decided, I'm going to put a little bit more salt in today because I know that the people that are going to eat this food like a little more salt. It's, that's the environmental kind of response. It's like your body's able to adapt to all these things. And so it's this process of, how we're able to show up in all these different environments and respond to different situations and kind of have this dynamically changing chemistry in our body. Right. And, what makes us flexible. Because if we were only able to just produce like one protein per gene, we would not really be a species that's been able to colonize the whole globe and do all these amazing things. So, epigenetic changes can happen from, the food that you eat, the air that you're breathing, toxins that you're taking in your body, exercise that you do, meditation. Like, meditation has been shown to change like 2,000 to 3,000 different genes in your body. Pretty profound. And, some of those genes are being turned up, some of them are being turned down. And so epigenetic changes, they're neutral, but they can have positive or negative consequences on your health. Kind of, if you're smoking, that's going to cause some negative epigenetic changes and cause more inflammation. If you're meditating and exercising, it's going to cause some positive genes to get expressed. But yeah, like you said, these are also things that can be passed down from your ancestry. Because what they found in the rat studies, like I've got a lot of issues with rodent studies for some things in science, but when you're looking at like how generations, pass things along, it's a great way to look and see how in a short time period, like, how that happens. And so what they found is that these little marks in certain cases can actually get transmitted from, parent to children to grandchildren. And there's a lot of really good studies now in humans too that show, grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have exaggerated stress response, which actually I believe partially explains some of the stuff that I was describing earlier. My grandparents on my mom's side were both in the Holocaust, grandfathers in concentration camps. And so I think that I was actually kind of brought into this world with a heightened stress response from trauma. And I think a lot of people are right now. I think a lot of what we're seeing in the world right now is a sort of built up trauma response that we don't necessarily know how to deal with because it's not necessarily coming from our own lifetime. But if you think about it in a logical evolutionary way, what our bodies are really designed to do is prepare the next generation for whatever the environment is that we're experiencing at the time. So if you conceive and you're under a lot of stress and pressure, like you're going to select the right sperm and the right egg that are most likely to provide your offspring with a stress response that's suited to that current environment. Or if you are in a famine, like you're gonna select sperm and egg that is likely to help someone survive in a famine. So like there's actually some studies looking at, and it kind of comes back to World War II. There was this thing called the Dutch hunger famine, where all these trains got blockaded and there was no ability to get food to a certain region of Holland for this period of time. And they found that actually depending on if a woman was pregnant at that time, depending on what trimester that happened, like whether she was early in her pregnancy or later in her pregnancy, that her children and grandchildren would either be predisposed to obesity or have a lower risk of obesity. So it's like, it just kind of depends what the environment is doing at that particular time. But it's super fascinating and really gives this multi-generational viewpoint that, indigenous cultures and native cultures have known about and talked about forever, right? Like the 7 generations thing. There's really some science that backs that up now, that what you're doing right now in your lifetime is going to have an impact down the road in a whole bunch of different ways. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there we go. Yeah. It's pretty important stuff. And when you think about it, you're doing something pretty unique here. I haven't spoken to anybody doing what you're doing yet. And I think that for me, I had some digestive issues and I was like, oh, well, what is this? And I went to a gastroenterologist and, they were like, oh, well, maybe, try eating this stuff or that stuff. And they gave me there's something called a FODMAP diet, some kind of for IBS and things like that. And as I kind of started to follow that, I was also taking some supplements, but really it's like, kind of just throwing a dart in the dark because no one really knew, like no one could really say exactly what to do or what to take. And I was kind of just experimenting with different supplements or different lifestyle choices. And definitely meditation is huge, right? That's so important. You never really hear anybody bashing meditation. There's no like anti-meditation campaigns going on. Thank God. It's super beneficial, and exercise too. Like you said, what we're doing is really, so I'll kind of tell you what I know, and then you can kind of elaborate on it, I guess. So you analyze people's DNA. They send you a sample, and you go over that, and you're looking for what exactly when that happens, like that 1% of that epigenetic area, to try and diagnose maybe like, okay, eat more carrots, go to sleep earlier. Is that kind of an idiot's way of explaining what you do?
It's pretty close. I'll kind of explain it a little more in detail.
Cool.
So, I do genetic analysis with people, and I kind of look at it a little bit as like a 3-step process, right? So, stage 1 is understanding what hardware you have. Like if you have a Windows machine and you've got a Mac machine, you're not going to load the exact same hardware on it just because it's wired differently. And so looking at the genetics really gives you this sort of like really baseline understanding of how someone's wired. And what that allows me to do is compare it to this giant database of studies that have been done on these little individual places in your DNA. So like one letter variation in your DNA, sometimes they don't matter at all. Sometimes they haven't been able to find anything that it's tied to, but sometimes science has been able to find some very significant changes. So say, for example, there's 20 or 30 different, they call them polymorphisms, polymorphisms that have been identified that really change someone's response to saturated fat, like from butter and coconut oil and that. And, that's why some people do so well with the keto diet. And some people really, gain weight on it and are wondering why their friend is doing so well on it while they're not. And this happened to me and my wife, where I do really well on it. When I started it, she started to gain weight. And then it wasn't until we looked at her genes and that it kind of made sense, because she's got a lot of those variants that are related to a poor response to saturated fat. So, that's kind of the stage 1 is you kind of compare what your hardware is like to this whole database of studies that are out there. And then stage 2 is kind of the epigenetic part, where you're figuring out what software you want to load onto the hardware. And that's what I help people with, is really look at, all right, what information that can we give your body? Because, ultimately it's like food is just information for the body. It's exercise, meditation, all these things. It's just environmental inputs. And if you kind of break it down like that, you can just kind of look at like, all right, what are all the information sources your body's getting, and which ones are causing it to, not function as well, and which ones can we kind of shift so that you really are running at optimum speed.
Yeah. What about like, excessive television watching, or different kinds of maybe like really aggressive music, or different kinds of does that play a part in it too? Or, who knows what like the cell phone signals are doing to us and stuff. Do you get into any of that? Does that have any factors?
Oh yeah, totally. I think that, but to break that apart, I think there's at least 2 or 3 different factors there. So in terms of, watching lots of movies and looking at your phone all the time, you've got the light aspect of that. And light is one of the biggest epigenetic modifiers there is. Like our bodies are designed to respond to light. And that's something, like I was mentioning earlier, looking at these short cycle epigenetic changes happen in these genes called the circadian genes. And they basically control all these functions in the body, and they kind of act as like a conductor of a symphony orchestra. And the light is the signal in a lot of cases to like make sure everything is synchronized together. Because if you go back, 200 years before we had electricity, and the entire span of human history before that, the sun would be the main light source that we're all exposed to on a daily basis. And then when you look at fire, which was going to be the other main source at night, it contains a very, very low percentage of blue light. And what we've done right now with all the screens and LED lights and fluorescence is we've radically shifted the light spectrum that we're exposed to on a daily basis.
Right, which alters our circadian rhythm. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. It alters our circadian rhythm. It causes oxidative stress, which is going to cause cell damage in the eye, and in the part of the eye that transmits those signals to the brain that basically says, hey, it's this time. So I think there's a lot of issues right now that are being caused by improper light exposure.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely something I look at.
Light pollution. That's another thing. Like everywhere you go, major cities, there's lights on and you can't see the sky, and that, it has all kinds of effects. I lived in the jungle for a little while. I spent 6 months in Peru, and I found myself like really enjoying it because I felt, wow, I mean, my body must love this. My genes must love this, because when it's nighttime, there's candle lights, but that's pretty much it. And then that goes out, and then you're ready to go to bed. I found myself sleeping more, dreaming more, feeling more refreshed when I woke up in the morning. Big game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're in Peru, you're closer to the equator, which is going to pretty significantly change the spectrum of sunlight that you're getting and the amount of UV and IR light. And that's going to cause some changes with your metabolism in general. And, I think that's a big factor too, that there's not a lot of people looking at, but the few that are real certain that distribution of where you are latitude wise on the planet actually changes some of these dynamics because of the angle of the sun, which is some pretty wild stuff, but I think it's got some weight behind it.
Everyone's got to pack up and move.
Yeah, right. Well, it's more about just learning how to exist within those environments, and what we're doing with EMF and the signals from your cell phones, like you were mentioning, is further messing with people's ability to utilize sunlight correctly, because sunlight is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Our bodies are basically tuned for that to be the biggest source of EM that we're getting. And, again, we've kind of like in the last 20 years thrown ourselves into this giant worldwide experiment with no control group on, just everyone is exposed to this stuff. So not great. Curious, where in Peru did you stay for 6 months?
So just outside of Iquitos in the Amazon jungle. I was at a place called the Temple of the Way of Light.
Okay. Yeah, I heard of that.
Yeah. Sounds like a cult, but it's not. Someone actually asked me that yesterday. They're like, sounds like a cult. And I kind of just went with it. I was like, yeah, I escaped a cult. So, I'm a survivor. And, no, they're great people down there doing great work with ayahuasca, indigenous Shipibo shamans and healers. And that's another aspect of what you do too. I want to get into, working with cannabis, and, I guess it's been, maybe it recently came to my attention, maybe 7 years ago or something, where I found out about the endocannabinoid system. I'm wondering maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, the endocannabinoid receptors, the system in our body, and how cannabis plays a role in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I got into genetics and epigenetics initially more through the nutrition side. But once I realized that there was a number of studies out there that have been looking at these genes and how they influence people's response to cannabis, it really turned on a light bulb for me, because, I've been into weed since I was 14 or 15. Yeah. And I was just always one of those people that, just naturally was drawn to it. And I'd had so many experiences throughout my life that I just didn't quite know how to make sense of, where, someone would have a really extreme response to weed, or someone would really not like it. Like, I remember my girlfriend in high school, I always wanted her to smoke weed with me, and I finally got her to one time, and she didn't enjoy it. I just couldn't wrap my head around how that was possible, because I had such a good response to it.
Right.
But then, looking at this information that really lays out some pretty strong underlying biological reasons why some people just don't have as good a reaction, or some people react more strongly, really kind of rewired my sense of empathy around this, and sort of being able to put myself in other people's shoes, and in the possibility that, okay, this isn't just something in someone's head. This is like a real biological response to THC that's different. And so I've spent the last couple of years really diving into that research that's out there, and trying to understand why some people are, really drawn to cannabis like I was, and some people could care less or have negative responses to it and get anxious or paranoid, or, I've talked to some people, they're like, yeah, I took one hit and I was like tripping for like a day, and like, that's not the typical response, but it really does happen to some people.
Well, that's interesting though, because, and talking about epigenetics and how you explained it to me, that brings to mind, that I oftentimes talk about how things aren't so black and white. There's a lot of nuance to be discovered here, and I think this, from my experience, I love cannabis and I smoke it often, but sometimes I'll have experiences where I'll just be like, holy shit, like the FBI is in a van outside and they're watching me. I'll be like, oh no, what is going on? And maybe it's a particular strain, or maybe it's something that I ate that day. Is that some, is there like a correlation between that? Can it kind of vary between where you are in your lifestyle, your diet, and the kind of strain that you're using?
Yeah, so I would say that definitely, yes. The strain can make a difference. Whatever terpenes are involved, different array of cannabinoids can affect you differently. There's a lot of research that hasn't been done yet on that. But what's been almost more interesting to me is to find these sort of things that strains don't seem to override, right? Like there's certain people that, like, no matter what strain they try, it doesn't matter. They're just not into it.
Right.
But at the same time, like, yeah, I mean, that's one area I'm really interested in is, okay, how can we take certain terpenes and shift the experience so that it is smooth every time, and understanding, in particular, which ones are you going to react to, or what balance of cannabinoids is going to set you off like that. And that's really helpful to know.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah, I was just going to say, terpenes is also something that's sort of new to me. I think ever since moving to Colorado, I used to live in New York, and I would just, procure my cannabis in the way that those do who enjoy that when living in New York. Now I'm in Colorado, and it's it's above ground, so it's all legit. You walk into a place and they can tell you about the terpenes, they can tell you about the THC, the CBD, the other alkaloids, and in the cannabis strain that you're purchasing. Can you talk a little bit about the terpenes and what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are going to be the molecules in the plant that flavor it, basically, and there's plants all across the plant kingdom create terpenes, like things that make evergreen trees smell piney, or lemons and oranges, like the citrus smell. All of these different herbs and, like essential oils are full of terpenes. That's basically what they mostly are. And the cannabis plant is one of the most talented at creating the kind of whole spectrum of them, which is why you get all the strain names, from Orange Crush to Grape Gorilla or whatever. You get all of the flavors, every possible thing. Right. And the terpenes themselves have been shown to have some different effects, and they can really shift the high. And they have some medicinal value in and of themselves. And that's really what different strains are, is these different combinations of cannabinoids and terpenes. And even the distinction between indica and sativa has way more to do with the terpenes than anything. Like myrcene is a terpene that's going to be found mostly in indica strains. It's really the thing that creates more of that stony sedative type effect. CBN, the cannabinoid, will also do that too. But CBN is more of a product from leaving your weed stored for a long time. It's not something that's made so much in the plant itself, but it's something that happens after the fact. So if you ever have weed that you've been like storing for months, and then you try it and it's a little bit different, you feel a little bit more stony, that's usually the CBN.
Yeah, I've definitely had the experience of feeling a little bit more stony from finding, oh, look at this little nug in there. Where's that from? 2010? All right, well, guess might as well light it up. Don't want to let anything go to waste. Yeah. And you also mentioned, I think in your email to me, you were mentioning how different genetic variations in MAOI, or you were mentioning about MAOI inhibitors from people using ayahuasca, that these can also account for certain kinds of anomalous non-response to orally ingesting DMT or psilocybin, and I've definitely had that experience, and seeing people down in Peru, oh, I didn't feel anything or nothing happened to me, and someone else like, well, I went to the center of the universe and met God, and so it's like, what is your work kind of like are you looking in that direction too now that kind of psychedelics are becoming more mainstream, talked about? We decriminalized mushrooms here in Denver, so is that something that you're interested in looking at or have been looking at?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, a lot of it is speculative right now. There's really no one that I've seen doing actual research on it. What I'm doing is extrapolating and saying, all right, so we know that MAO, is responsible for breaking down DMT in the body. And we know from other studies that people can have different levels of MAO depending on different genetic variants. So you put 1 + 1 together and it equals 2, and inherently people are going to have different responses to psychedelics that use MAO as a metabolizer if there's different levels in the body. And I mean, like you said, this is what people see in real life. And I had a client that had a very similar experience to what you're describing. She went to 2 different ayahuasca ceremonies and didn't feel anything. And sure enough, I took a look at her MAO genes, and she had a number of different variants in there that were associated with higher MAO levels. So our theory was, well, she's just kind of breaking down the DMT and would need a higher level of Banisteriopsis caapi or whatever MAO inhibitor you're using.
Right.
And so I think that there's definitely some room here to look much deeper into this.
Right. Yeah. It's not a one size fits all approach. And I think we kind of live in a world that tries to make things like that, but it's way more varied than just kind of it's either this way or that way, or, everybody gets the same thing and it should just work. And like you mentioned before, we see that with diets too. I mean, I think, for me, definitely losing a little bit of weight has been kind of a goal of mine for a little while. And I feel like sometimes I'm like, oh man, I don't know what's going on here. I'm hitting a wall, trying different things. Do you also, I would imagine so that's probably a big one for people, right? Weight loss or fitness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do a lot of work with weight loss, do a lot of work with energy levels with people. A lot of the people that I work with are generally healthy, but kind of looking for that next step up. I like working from more of an optimal health kind of standpoint. Really looking for more like, okay, how can I perform at my peak? How can I really show up the way I want to and make my brain function well? And so that's what I like working on with people. I do see some people that are more, kind of working on some specific health issues, but really as a coach, I'm much more focused on, performance coaching and optimal health more so than treating or doing anything like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, if you wouldn't mind, would you be able to maybe just kind of walk me through how that process plays out? Somebody reaches out to you and they have a question, and then how you take it from there to kind of, like you said, get them to perform at their peak. And I know you mentioned some of it before by going through the I guess they send you a sample, right? Mm-hmm. And you kind of go through and analyze that and then report back to them. And then how does that kind of that partnership in terms of working with them play out?
Yeah, totally. So it kind of depends on the person. I've got a couple different package options that I do with people. Sometimes, I'll just work with people from an informational standpoint where I'm just doing the analysis and we go over it, usually take about 90 minutes, 2 hours to go through all the information. That works really well for some people that are kind of self-directed and able to implement that information well on their own and aren't looking necessarily for kind of that ongoing support. But then I also work with some people, in a coaching capacity where we do the analysis and then we do monthly check-ins, and I'm kind of continuing to help, you refine the process and see what's working and maybe try something different if it's not exactly what you expected or what I expected, and just kind of continue to utilize that genetic blueprint as a way to understand how you're reacting to different things. And then, I do some lab testing as well and track some markers over time. Both those options start with a genetic test, like I mentioned. And I'm affiliated with a company called Epigenetic, which stands for limitless in Greek, or means limitless in Greek. And we've got our own genetic test that we contract with a private lab to do. Mm-hmm. And so, there's a lot of concern with like 23andMe selling people's data, and a lot of the bigger companies that basically their business model is we're going to collect a bunch of people's data and we're going to sell it to pharmaceutical companies. And the people that are giving us their data, they're not getting any profit from it. They're not getting any value from it. So we've made it so you can bypass that and you own your data. And it's really privacy secure. We take a lot of security measures with our test to make sure that it doesn't end up in the wrong hand.
Well, that's good. Yeah, we don't want the new world order getting control of our genes and making clones of us to take us out, like in the new Will Smith movie that's coming out.
Right? See, that's funny. Like that tends to be one of the first things people say is the clone thing. But I feel I have mixed feelings about it because I want some clones in me. I just don't want I want clones that can like do the laundry and do the dishes.
Right?
And stuff.
Yeah, I know. My God, yeah. I want clones that can
cloning me. Tell me about it. Like, let me know.
I need like 5 clones to just read a bunch of books for me and then give me the cliff notes and the summaries of them. That would be great.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Do you see like common themes when people are submitting their samples to you for analysis? Are there certain kinds of I guess what would you call them, like variants or maybe like dysfunctions that are being shown in the genes? Is there like a common sort of grouping that you've identified that says, oh well, clearly a lot of people are coming to me and this particular gene is functioning in a way that's not serving them, and then this protocol will match for them? Is there like sort of a common thread there?
Yeah, and I do, but I want to kind of tease out some nuance there in terms of what you're describing earlier about things not being black and white, and just kind of give your listeners more of an idea of how I look at this, because I think it's helpful, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of how to look at genetics.
Sure.
Where a lot of people will look at a variant and say, okay, that's a mutation, that's bad, or it's causing dysfunction here. But for the most part, when you look at these things and take like a bigger evolutionary context, again, like most of these things are just responses to different environments over time. And because we're in, a different environment, or we're not living in the same place that our ancestors lived in, we're seeing more mismatch with environment. So it's less about like looking at a gene and saying, okay, this thing is dysfunctional. It's more about saying, okay, this gene is not functioning well in this particular environment with this particular food or light or stress or whatever. How can we match it up? And exactly like you said, like matched up to a different protocol. So I kind of want to soften, I guess, the notion that there's dysfunctional genes, and in very rare cases like of genetic disease, there certainly are. I don't want to discount that, but that's something totally different than what I'm working with. And let's see, the other question that you had there. Refresh my memory. I kind of lost my train of thought.
I think you might have answered that. Well, I was just talking about I guess the common themes that show up from people. Yeah, it seems like it's kind of environmental. So, is that right? Or
yeah, well, in terms of common themes, I will see certain genes that, and you kind of know it based on the population frequency. So within the population, what the distribution of what they call them alleles, these different letter combinations in the genes are. So, say someone in the whole population, I'm thinking about this gene called FAAH. This is a gene in the endocannabinoid system. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the exact variant here in SNPpedia. SNPpedia is one of so I can tell you exactly what the distribution is.
Would you say that was SNPpedia?
Yeah, SNPedia. It's kind of a good repository. Let's see. Yeah, so in people of European descent, you got about 60% of people with a CC variant in this one variant that I'm thinking of, and about 32% have the AC version, and about 4% have the AA version. That's a little closer than what I was thinking. But what I see is about 90% of people that I work with have a CC variant. I don't know why that is. A lot of this has to do with stress management. The endocannabinoid system is pretty involved in stress management, and this gene variant tends to code for lower levels of your own cannabinoids that you make, your levels of anandamide. This is the one that activates the cannabinoid 1 receptor. So this basically what I'm seeing is a higher percentage of people coming to me because they're having issues, and I can't isolate it at all just to one gene, but it's a pattern that I see. And so I'll see this with other gene variants where there's a higher percentage of people that have issues with inflammation because of certain gene variants that are coming for help, right?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Wow. You brought up endocannabinoid again, which reminded me, I kind of want to maybe circle back to that because I have a question. It's kind of fascinating to me that we have this system in our body. It kind of makes me think that like we've evolved, co-evolved consuming cannabis. Is that fairly accurate to say?
Not necessarily. I mean, you got to think of it more as we both have a common ancestor, both us and the cannabis plant. Like if the way that we've evolved over time, we've conserved those cannabinoid receptors because they work really well. And yeah, we've probably been consuming cannabis because it works, right? Like for forever,
right?
Because we have that same system in the body, and there's there's homology or there's similar structure there that the chemicals in the cannabis plant can interact with their body. But it actually serves a really important regulatory role in the human body, and we're really just beginning to understand, the depth of it. I mean, almost every single cell in the human body has cannabinoid receptors. It's like super ubiquitous.
Wow.
And we're finding that all these other systems in the body, dopamine, serotonin, opiate receptors, immune cells, all these things respond to cannabinoids, where cannabinoids kind of act as this underlying layer of influence. And so this is, I think, to some degree why you see people saying that CBD is helpful for so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit unpredictable, and I think that's partially because people's endocannabinoid systems are different and wired differently, and we're just kind of beginning to touch the surface of how to predict that and understand it. I mean, it's really, really complicated.
We're beginning to scratch the surface with a lot of this stuff, and mapping the genome, and new technologies like CRISPR, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
all this new information that's coming on, and it's really fascinating to me as someone who's really way outside of this area. That I'm glad that you're here to talk about this. What's like the most exciting thing for you right now?
Some of the most exciting things for me right now are a class of compounds called peptides. And peptides really just means a short amino acid sequence. It's like a fragment of a protein. And there's this whole class of compounds that are being researched for longevity and disease reversal and injury healing, and they're really effective because they're basically little tiny portions of molecules that our bodies produce naturally. So they're very low side effect. They're very targeted to different systems in the body. They're really showing some really impressive results in studies, and there's some people really kind of predicting that class of compounds is going to change a lot of the way that we work with disease and wellness, and kind of looking at preventative. I really don't like the word preventative medicine. I really like the idea of just like trying to get yourself to function at a high level, because that's going to inherently prevent shit from going wrong, right? Like it's more of a focus on the now rather than the future, I guess. But I really think the peptide class is pretty interesting. And then, just to touch on what you said, like you being kind of more in the psychedelic space and in the world that you run with, there's not a lot of crossover between kind of the biohacking world. There's a little bit in the optimal health space, but I really enjoy kind of bridging those gaps, because I think there's actually a lot in common, especially around bodily autonomy and autonomy of consciousness and the ability to self-experiment and do things that the average person would look at you and go like, why would you want to do that?
Right.
There's an aspect of self-experimentation and breaking through personal boundaries that I think really transcends both of those spaces.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, I got into this more it's more about the mind body connection for me than it is just this, like, I want to have a six pack and like live forever. Like, okay, that sounds fun, I guess. But like, no, I want to like,
I want to have a six pack and live forever. You should tweet that later.
yeah, right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's really more about like, just making sure my mind is functioning in a way that, when I do psychedelics, like I'm getting the most out of it, right? Like I want to be functioning in a cognitive level that's high, and the kind of knowing that I'm going to be around for a while is, a motivating factor. And but yeah, I just think that there's more room for kind of those worlds to kind of commingle a little bit.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I relate to that so much because, early on in my psychonauting career, I would listen to people like Dave Asprey, and I would listen to, I would definitely kind of dabble in this sort of biohacking space and take what I thought was good. And, I like to experiment. I like to explore and, microdosing and different kinds of dosages and settings and all these sorts of things. It's an experimentation to see what is working for me, and what might work for me might not work for somebody else. But totally, there's definitely a intersectional dance happening there. I definitely see that, and as this stuff becomes more above ground, we can definitely start to explore that. One of the things that actually I've been doing, I'm not doing anymore, but I was doing ketamine therapy. And earlier in the conversation, we were talking about how you were very in your mind, and me too. Everything's mind for me. Well, I'm just gonna, I'm just like Krang from the Ninja Turtles. I'm just this like giant suit lugging a brain around, and the ketamine therapy actually really helped me get in touch with my body and inform, my body through the energy or emotion or distress I was feeling caused by the nervous system, to then inform the brain of like, hey, like, listen to what's going on down here. And I see that crossover happening, I think maybe more and more now.
Yeah, it's super fascinating how those substances can unlock that sense of somatic, life. Like I've had similar experiences. I'd say more so on psilocybin for me, and MDMA for sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you were doing ketamine therapy, what type of doses were they using? Were you doing like full being put under, or like smaller doses, or how did that work for you?
Yeah, so I was taking lozenges of 100 milligrams, and it would be like a 2-hour session. I'd probably start to feel it come on within 15 minutes or so. My mouth would start to get numb, and then I really connect with ketamine as a substance. I feel like I can really paint pictures in that space and kind of personify emotions that are running through me, and then kind of give names to them and really create a whole kind of visual space under that experience, and later process those things that then came up.
Mm-hmm. So this was a like assisted psychotherapy setting.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, here in Denver. Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool.
And it's it's something that. Oh yeah, no, you were saying.
No, keep going, please.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was just something that I had ignored for so long, and I think so many people do, and I think that's what your work is bringing out to the surface as well. Is like, hey, let's like listen to our bodies. Let's listen to this sensory input data that's being interpreted through our bodies and our genes and the numerous ways that it is. And oftentimes, we just tend to live in the mind. We're a very mind-centric culture here in the West.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's a lot of room to like start to pay attention to that feedback loop that can happen, like once you start to know, okay, I might have this tendency, like I have some tendencies in my genes to do this a certain way. Then you test it out, and then you see like, okay, is this true? Is this, what happens if I experiment with, doing a diet that has a little bit of a different ratio of foods to other foods, and, see what happens. And like you're saying, you get that kind of feedback loop of having an experience where all of a sudden your sensory data is being interpreted a little bit differently because you're able to pay attention to it a little bit differently. And I think that you can take that template that's so prescient and so like obvious sometimes in the psychedelic space. Like it's so different that you're just like blown open with like, okay, yeah, now I'm aware of this. I wasn't before. You can take that type of awareness and apply it to so many different other places in your life. And it's like those tiny little things that you're doing throughout the day, that I work with people on, and like light exposure and food and all this stuff. It's like, yeah, it's not about just doing it for the sake of doing it. It's about like what results are you getting from it, and how are you going to actually how are you going to see an improvement in your life and your ability to have more fulfilling relationships, or create the art, or cool projects that you're trying to work on. It's like that's really where I find a lot of value in this stuff.
Yes, exactly. And I need that more and more. I keep trying to optimize because I want to have this creative output that is magnificent, and if I'm waking up in the morning and I'm a little foggy, or if I'm, saying, cause I'm definitely a night owl, so I tend to kind of turn on at night, and but when I do wake up in the morning, I feel like, oh, well, this is nice. Actually, I do enjoy kind of waking up in the morning early and getting this done. But I think that maybe, and this is just my kind of speculation, but the stress that we encounter from our environment, from maybe eating the wrong foods and all these things, it seems like to me that like our body has to expend a lot of energy to, deal with this stress and keep us maybe ping-ponging back and forth in between this like fight or flight response and, this stress response. And it's like, maybe it's like, wow, this is like a lot to handle. But when we can kind of clear that out of the way, that's when we can start to really perform more at peak levels. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think you're totally spot on, and you're kind of differentiating here between chronic stress and acute stress. So if you've got a lot of chronic stressors going on, you're constantly eating the wrong food, you're constantly doing stuff that is putting your body in a state where it needs to, exactly like you said, expend more energy to just deal with this, or putting it in a state where it's not able to produce the energy that's sufficient to deal with the demands. That's a problem, and is going to create brain fog and low energy and all that. But in the other case of acute stress, like you actually need some acute stress. Like they call it eustress is a good thing, like EUSTRESS. And in rat studies, they've done these studies where they basically have two groups of rats where they specifically make it so that they have absolutely zero stress in their life. Nothing. Like they're totally taken care of. They got the penthouse suite. They're chilling. And then they have another group of rats where there's three groups. One was like under chronic stress, and the other one, they had like acute stressors where like they had to, work a little bit for their food, or had to do something that was like, putting them under a little bit of stress. And what they found was that the rats that have acute stress live the longest. The ones that are like, generally have low levels of stress most of the time. But then, it would be like, having to finish a project for a deadline and be like, all right, I'm just going to kick it in overdrive here. Or, I'm going to go lift heavy weights for 30 minutes, here and there. That type of stress on the body is actually really good for it. So it's sort of like really setting your body up so that most of the time, like you don't have that much to deal with. And so that when you do encounter something where you need to turn it into high gear, like you're ready and you're prepared to do it,
Yeah. Are you familiar with the learned helplessness experiment? Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, where does that fall into in terms of stress? Because that's, I think, measuring unpredictability and a stress in an environment where there's, I'll just explain it for the listeners. Like the way that I heard it was that they had an experiment with two dogs. One was in a room where they both had electrified floors, and one, they rang a bell and shocked the dog at the same time, and it was consistent throughout the duration of the experiment. The other room where the dog was in was the electrified floor, and the bell were random, and it would just happen at any time, and it was just chaos. And that, obviously the poor dog was, just destroyed from that. And so I'm wondering if we live in this kind of crazy time right now where there's so much exponential change happening and politics and news and all this crazy stuff going on. There's a certain level of like unpredictability. What kind of stress is that?
I would say that is chronic stress for sure.
Okay.
That's going to be, and the learned helplessness stuff, it's basically, subjecting something to distressing kind of thing that it can't escape from. And so then they like open the gates and they're like, yeah, you can escape. We're still going to give you this thing. And the animal doesn't think that it can go anywhere. So it's learned to think that that's its only possible state. And it takes down the degrees of freedom, I think we see that a lot with people who are in states of trauma, who have had significant, and you can look at the whole cultural experience right now as a form of trauma, right? Like what you're saying, like everything is so
like a collective trauma. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we are, very much as a global and, American society, really feeling and acting out the different ways that people experience trauma, and it's very difficult to parse out. But I think that there's some really good analysis of it, and from the psychological side. But yeah, I think it gives people less of a ability to look at other alternatives, right? Like I think you see this a lot in people that just kind of dig their heels in and say, well, that's the way it is,
right.
or this is just how the system is, or there being the sense of, an inability to do anything different from a cultural perspective because we've learned to be helpless. We've learned to have no agency. And I recognize this in myself sometimes, right? Like all the time, actually, when there's, you can look at it with like mass shootings right now. I feel like that's a giant thing that is making people feel like, okay, there's nothing we can do. All we can do is just blame someone and kind of just throw blame, no matter who you are, just to someone else that's different from you and your viewpoint. It's like those types of things are definitely chronic stressors in terms of societal factors. But I think you're totally spot on. There's an aspect of learned helplessness where, because it's so random, even if you give someone a chance to do something differently, it's like this is so ingrained in like this is the way it is that it's hard for a lot of people to make that jump when there's a lot of trauma being kind of expressed and brought up all the time.
Yeah. It's a major thing, and you mentioned that you're really working with people who are sort of in optimal health and just looking to get to that next peak level. Is this kind of approach that you're taking? Is that also things that people are looking at with individuals who are suffering from trauma? I mean, or do you actually encounter individuals suffering from trauma and deal with that as well?
Yeah, I do a little bit. I mean, I don't directly work with trauma because I'm not a therapist. Right. I actually am getting a master's in counseling right now. But not a therapist yet.
Great.
So, I mean, a lot of these things are going to be supportive for anyone that is recovering from trauma. You look at a lot of the most kind of recent integrative models looking at, all right, how can you do therapy with someone? How can you support them from, a nutritional perspective and an environmental perspective? All these things are interrelated in terms of creating the conditions for someone to make changes. Because, it's not just about just changing things in the mind. There's this feedback loop between our neurochemistry and the thoughts we think and emotions we have. And you can, influence both of those sides from either side, right? So you can take a drug, you can take a psychiatric drug, and in the short term make someone feel pretty, okay. It's not a great long-term solution, but it can change the way people think about things. Or vice versa, you can do some, serious internal work and shift the way that your body produces certain neurochemicals. So, looking at this from the perspective of epigenetics, you can do a lot of work from other angles too, not just the therapy side, not just the drug side, but like nutrition, sleep, making sure all these other things are supportive. And I think that people that are suffering from trauma could use this type of stuff the most in terms of setting themselves up for success. And personally, I feel like a lot of the work that I've done, personally on a therapeutic level has been really supported by this. And I question whether, some of my own internal process would have been possible or as fruitful, if I wasn't doing kind of this whole systems kind of approach to it while I've been in therapy and, working on things in various ways. I think it just allows for neuroplasticity and the mental capacity to like sit with difficult emotions and not run away from them. Like that takes some mental clearance, right? Like you got to have a little bit of, like you're saying, like if your body's expending energy fighting all these other stressful things, like you don't really have time to, or you don't have the energy and space to focus on the like very specific thing that you want to be thinking about that is stressful,
Right. Yeah. And it makes me think that, this is such a useful thing for people to know. And really, I actually came about sort of experimenting on my own. And my story is similar to yours, actually. I was doing stand-up comedy in New York and I got so drained and depressed and, I was out late at night and bad eating habits and drinking all the time. And I'm like, I got to do something different. So I kind of went to psychedelics for that and was sort of, biohacking psychedelics in my own way, and not to the degree of the systems approach that you're taking, but in my own way. But something had to happen there was a catalyst there for me to like kind of wake up and realize, I have a choice. But it seems to me that this kind of information, this kind of approach, super valuable. Like I could see this being useful to people and being taught in schools. Do you see that kind of this field progressing in that way, where we're maybe educating kids early on about how they can take control of their biology and make changes?
Oh, ideally. I mean, I think there's a big uphill battle to get that into schools. But I mean, you are seeing, meditation being brought into schools here and there. And I mean, yeah, I think if you can
actually, that's right. Yeah. When I was saying there's no one against meditation, I actually remember seeing some people posting on Facebook, because whenever you think no one's disagreeing, just go check the comments section, right?
Right.
People are like, well, this isn't useful. They should be studying. And, they're going to sit there in silence. They need to be learning math or whatever. And it's like, okay, all right. Well, but clearly we're not ready for this conversation on a mass societal level yet. I don't know.
Yeah. And then you still get some of the, evangelicals thinking that meditation is something to do with the devil.
It's the devil's work. Yeah.
Right.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we're heading up here now towards the end of the show, and I was just wondering maybe if we can get into something that I find to be pretty interesting with your background as a musician. First of all, do you still practice music? Do you use music in any of the sort of healing modalities in which you're prescribing or for yourself? Because I've definitely been experiencing that recently. I mean, I use binaural beats. Someone I know runs these gong bath ceremonies. Is there a capacity to that in what you're doing?
Yeah, totally. So I still make music. I produce electronic music under the pseudonym Few Texture. Cool. I'm on SoundCloud and all the things released.
Nice. I'll have to put those links in the show notes.
Yeah, totally. My music's all available online. I still play shows here and there. And I mean, I'm perpetually driven by dance and sound, and it's, kind of my own form of, I don't know, it's definitely a type of weird meditation for me, going and seeing live music. So I do that personally. And then I also, I'm glad to hear you're using binaural beats. I actually have a company called Inner Depth Audio that I have some binaural and isochronic tones and that kind of stuff that I have as well.
Yeah, maybe we should talk about. I mean, we're talking about it seems like you're doing everything. Like, is there anything that you're not doing? Like,
there's plenty I'm not doing. It's like I just get really interested in certain things, and just kind of follow the curiosity. I mean, I've been into binaural beats since I was like 15 or so. So it's been like a long-standing just interest, I guess. I guess when it looks like a lot when it builds up over time.
Yeah, no, these are all real, every facet of your work and all the things that you're talking about, super, super important to, performing at a peak level, optimizing health, and nothing exists in a vacuum. All these things, your genes, your ability, your cognitive processes, the exercise, sound, dance, right? Sometimes you got to go out, light a fire, get naked, dance around it, beat a drum, whatever you got to do to stay healthy and connected to the world, go to sleep without this light pollution and the blue light and all that stuff. So there's this interconnectedness with everything. It's not this one singular, just here, take this pill,
Right. Oh yeah, totally. And getting naked and dancing around a fire is probably like top of my list of things that everyone should be doing at some, here and there.
Yeah. See, there you go. That's what we need.
Yeah. Yeah. And awesome. I think there's, a lot of room to like, kind of bridge that sort of primal energy expression with, the kind of cutting edge biotech stuff like peptides, like why not both? Psychedelics, like it's all, like you said, you can't isolate anything. It's all helpful. So,
right.
I feel like there's a lot of, but my favorite people are kind of the ones that have gotten past those personal biases around like everything needs to be natural and from the earth, or like science is the only answer. It's like there's a lot of gray area in there where you can get a lot of value from trying different stuff out and putting yourself in different mindset.
Yeah. That's right. Yes, definitely. Swim in the gray, explore, see what's down there. Mm-hmm. Awesome. I just downloaded actually because I saw on your website, I was like, oh, this is right. This is for me. Top 10 biohacks for late night creatives. So I just downloaded that. I'm psyched awesome. to read it because that's what I do. I stay up late at night and, my girlfriend's like, what the hell are you doing? It's 3 a.m. I'm like, I'm working on I'm doing a podcast and, it's like, but awesome stuff, David. Thank you so much for joining. And for people that want more information, go to David Krantz. Is that the website? DavidKrantz.com?
It's David-Krantz with a little hyphen in there.
David-Krantz.com. Anything else that you got going on that you're working on, excited to share, or where you should direct people to find out more about your work?
No, I'd say go to david-krantz.com. And, if anyone's interested in doing a free 30-minute consultation, want to know if I can help you with something you're specifically looking for with genetic testing or having more energy and, weight loss, whatever it is, we can have a conversation and see if, what I've got can help you out. Other than that, for the most part, I don't know. I do have some cool projects, but I'm not quite ready to talk about them yet. So maybe there's another episode in the future sometime. I actually think that your audience would appreciate it. I just can't quite talk about it.
Oh, man. Building suspense. Perfect way to end an episode. Stay tuned for the next time, folks. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. Yeah, I might be giving you a call myself soon. So, guys, go to david-krantz.com. Check it out. Awesome stuff. Great conversation. I learned a ton, and I can't wait to learn more. So, thanks again, David. Hey, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Hope you guys like these podcasts and enjoy them. And if you do, please spread the podcast, share it, tell a neighbor, tell a coworker, tell a friend, tell a cat, tell a mouse, tell a dog, tell an ant, tell a firefly, tell whoever you tell. Share it, spread it, like it, all that good stuff. If you really love the show, you want to go a step further, you really want to help us out, leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, and go to patreon.com, patreon/Mike Brank, and patreon.com/Mike Brank, and you can donate as little as $1 a month, $2 a month, whatever you want. Help support the show that way as well. But remember, I love you guys no matter what you do. I just love that you tune in and you enjoy these podcasts. Message me. I like hearing feedback. Get in touch with me on Instagram, Epigenetic Podcast, Mike Brank on Facebook as well. And thanks to our sponsors, CBD Bombs. If you go to hempbombs.com and get 15% off all your CBD needs, I guess. And just enter the code Mike15 at checkout. But thank you once again to everybody. Thanks to Danny Barnett and Galaxia for the music, the intro and the outro. I love you all. Peace.